From the home offices of Ash and Flo, this is Unbillable Hours, a podcast about professional services marketing. Stick around to listen to our insights, tips, and best practices to improve your firm's marketing and even your career.
Welcome to this new episode of Unbillable Hours with another one with a guest, right? Ash is great. We have Sach here with us today, who I'll just let you introduce yourself, Sach, maybe. So I don't, I don't mess up, but I'll spoiler it and say that you have a job in that's dealing with digital transformation, right? So that the dreaded catchphrase of all things consulting. And we thought that makes you an very interesting guest because we hope to get some insights out of you to A, how you deal with digital transformation, and B, also maybe how you market it internally. But I'll shut up and let you introduce yourself if you like.
Cheers, thanks for that. So my name is Sach Garjee. I work for a Japanese manufacturer, so Kyocera, and I head up transformation. And I think, first off, I think it's a little bit of a misnomer with regards to digital transformation because for me, especially, digital is one aspect of transformation. Transformation generally should look as broad and as deep as possible across an organization or from a business perspective. So I kind of focus on like three key areas that I've driven towards making a difference within the company. So the first of those is around strategy. So strategic intent. So what I will look at is how can I support the design and development from a business perspective on our 1 to 3 year plans. So looking at the company agenda and how that then translates out by each of our functions. The other aspect is operational. So from a business model, what are we looking at? How are our operational processes working? What's the infrastructure system architecture that's sitting behind it? And how does that either enable or disable the way we're working? And then the wraparound, I guess, for all of this is culture. And it's something that we either hesitate or we tend not to want to talk about. But actually, there's a huge aspect in terms of transformation in order to make sure that the other pieces are accelerating is being able to design a culture that emphasizes the humanness of a business. Because actually, that is the major part of how a business operates. It's our colleagues. So hopefully that gives you a nutshell about me and what I do.
No, that's
yeah, for sure. Especially the whole thing about culture. And we agree with you in that transformation is not just digital. And with COVID, it's accelerated. I'm sure you can attest to that. But when you talk about selling to internal stakeholders, that means you basically have to market transformation, right? And that too to internal stakeholders and build about this culture. So how do you go about that, really?
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, and there is a tendency, especially you guys will know from a consulting perspective, that you're drawn to words that often confuse people, right? So it's quite difficult to simplify language in order to describe how transformation is going to affect change within an organization. So I guess one of the biggest hurdles from the outset, whenever anybody mentions transformation or change, is efficiency. So you're here with an axe, basically. You're the guy or the girl who's going to come in and talk about, right, how do we generate efficiencies? How can we be more efficient at what we're doing? So, and that's why I think it's key to understand the cultural aspect, because what you're talking about, in effect, is trying to engender trust from the outset. And that, for me, is a key aspect of transformation. It is being able to step into your colleagues' shoes, walk their walk, and try and understand, right, what are we trying to achieve that's in it for them? How are we helping them to add value to the work they're doing? It's not about removal of jobs. It's about removal of non-value added activity so that their brains, their intelligence, that can then be best utilized to help the organization build incremental value. Does that help?
Yeah, for sure. And that also adds into like minimizing cost centers and identifying value from cost centers and building all that within your transformation models.
And that's one of it. So that's a key point, actually, because that's what, in all of the conversations I would have across C-suite, it's always outcome-based. Mm-hmm. So it always comes down to, okay, so what does this mean to the bottom line? And then I have to shape the conversation to try and understand, well, yes, that's the overall goal, but actually, what's your journey in order to get there? So what are the activities you're doing across the business, not just from a sales pipeline and operational process flow? What else are you doing to ensure that actually, if your margin, your profit, your volume, your revenue, you're looking at increase year on year, you can't keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Are you changing the funnel? What are you doing that's actually helping your employees to go, well, this is how we can increase?
And what's interesting to me here is that you seem to be, and correct me if that's wrong, but what you seem to be saying is, as you go about making the case for transformation or working the stakeholder management for it, you seem to have two strategies here. One is to, like, for the C-suite, who might be the, I don't know if that's the right word, but the internal client, right? These are the guys who buy the transformational effort. But you also speak to the, what's the word there, the user or the recipient, like these the managers who might be in a particular part of in the organization that gets transformed, right? They're at the receiving end of whichever initiatives you implement. So you speak to both. Is that what I heard correctly? You make the case for an effort to both of them.
Yeah, of course. So, and if I take hierarchy out, right, and it's really difficult to do that. So I will support and work with all of our board members, and I have done even from Siemens and historically Honda level as well. It's being able to understand what's the goal, what are they solving for within their function, and how is everyone contributing towards that. So from a strategic perspective, what you're asking is, do I deploy a certain strategy or set of strategies in order to help embed transformation?
Yeah.
Is that an accurate translation?
Yeah, I would say so. Both help with that, and then also, I don't know, ensure that the execution works better, right? So removing the friction, because that is the typical story: is the board decides on something, and then there is resistance or something as you execute the piece.
Yeah. So one of the things I look at, and there is no silver bullet.
Yeah.
Okay? there is a number of models. Everything from you can go through a whole host, even the stages of grief, etc., that look at what change model is best applied for a business, depending on the context and circumstance and the landscape they see themselves in. However, if I look at it, what I tend to look at is, right, what's been done historically? How has that worked? Where has it come a cropper? So where has it stopped working? It's either paused or it's lost momentum or it's lost its way. And then I look at, right, how do I invert the triangle? So as opposed to a top-down approach, how do I do a blend of a bottom-up approach as well as a top-down approach? And what does that actually mean? So you want sponsorship, but you don't want sponsorship such that it means it's a board approval. Because actually that board member who's your sponsor goes, then you're back to square one. So it very much has to be the company has got behind what transformation means, and actually and as is always the case, it's very challenging to bring people on that journey in a fast way. It does take time, and it's identifying, right, what are the paths that need to be walked to help the organization as a whole understand this is where they are on the journey, and these are some of the milestones that are going to help them to clarify, almost like a sat nav. These are there's a fast journey, there's a slow journey, there's a scenic journey, and there's certain milestones that you can pitch out and go, right, okay, so this is what we hope to see happen.
Yeah, Ash, you go first.
Yeah, so what you essentially entail is that there is an element of educating your stakeholders, and this education potentially comes from what you find out and what you research, and also what people or consultancies approach you in terms of like, these are the ways that you can do the transformation. And then as you speak about milestones and stuff, it's more about accelerating or like finding the right pace for your journey. So there's like constant education involved from what we understand, and also a lot of communication, and perhaps even like multiple opportunities to like adjust your stakeholder map and your RACI and everything.
And I think, I think that's where we're, in terms of communication and sort of how that works, a key aspect of it has to be, do I trust you to help me and my area? On top of that, it's, you're the business expert, you're the SME, so you're the subject matter expert. You know your stuff, you know it inside out. So it's very difficult. From a transformational aspect, there is no point in coming in and going, you should do it this way. Why? Well, because I've tried it somewhere else and I know it works. Well, that's great. Thanks for that. That's really helpful. It doesn't, even when we talk, it jars. Yeah. And there is a lot to be said. And I work with I work with pretty much most of the company. And each and every one of them highly intelligent, right? They know their stuff. They know where blockers are. They know where the challenges are. They know why they can't get any further. And in some cases, they're just not clear on how they can remove the blocker.
Yeah.
And that's the transformation.
Can I ask a tangential question to that? Because you said something that is, I find interesting because of a conversation I had last week. What you just described, so someone coming in and saying, oh, you guys should be doing this instead of that because you're doing it wrong and there's a hidden opportunity there. That used to be somewhat fashionable, or that seems to be related to something that was known as the challenger sales approach. It's a bit older framework of going in and essentially, that approach has been misunderstood as going in and telling the client, here's where you're wrong. So my tangential question is, do you still see that? Do you still, consultancies still do that? Because I agree with what you just said. There's literally no point in doing it that way. Just busting through the door and saying, guys, we need to change this because, this other thing over here is better. That literally has everything shut down. Is this still a thing? Do you still see that in your domain? You don't have to call out consultancies, just in general. Does that still happen?
Yeah. No, so what there is a tendency from all agencies is rinse and repeat. Yeah. So they will have tried something, they will have been successful with it, and they may have been successful a number of times. But the challenge with that is that they have an expectation based on their history that they can apply the same methodology and it will work out the same way. Now, the challenge comes from the organization. The organization may be in a completely different place, or it may know its limitations, it may know its growth trajectory, it may know its opportunity. So when you've got if there is agencies coming in and saying, right, this is a better way of doing it, as long as they're backing it up with contextual information, and by that, and this is where normally the analysis happens, right? Is right, this is what's going on. But I guess the biggest bugbear I would have with what are the other options? You just outlined one option. So what happens to options 2, 3, 4, and 5? And where does it break down? And where's the crossover?
Interesting. And in your own work, because I mean you alluded to that you have to do the same thing. What do you do to not be the person that comes in and says you should be doing this instead of that because it works better? Like what is your, so you provide more options, or what is your?
No, that's the trust part.
Yeah.
So there has to be a conversation around, why am I here? What am I here to do versus what am I not here to do? And there has to be, and it's a very difficult organizational concept. So looking at trust from the outset, it plays back to all of our biases. It plays back to how we were brought up, all of our history, then translates out into how we trust others. And then an organizational perspective, it's very much in terms of, normally the perspective is, you have to earn your trust. So you have to do some things right. So that's what, when I have the conversations from the outset, and I'm trying to understand, right, how is this going to work? What needs to happen? And what I'm trying to understand is, what value can I add to this area from the get-go? Because actually, what I want them to see me as is a trusted advisor.
Yeah. So it's having a conversation and showing empathy and listening versus coming in and saying, "Oh, here's the solution I already figured out, and now I'm going to convince you to buy this or adopt it."
Yeah, let me go a little bit further. You can't have an agenda.
Oh, nice.
You come
That's
into a conversation and have an agenda. So an agency will always have an agenda, right? I'm an internal asset. So and I make clear upfront what my agenda is. So my agenda is the well-being and sustainability of the company.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that I'm looking to take each individual and build upon them. So find out how they themselves can add incremental value. And that has to be both for them as well as for the company. So that's a personal development perspective as well as an organizational development. Now that's very difficult to do from an agency perspective, because your agenda as an agency is, I want you as a client and I want to make money from you.
Yeah.
But I also want us to be a partnership, right? So in the best instances, it's about collaboration.
Yeah.
So that has to be there. There has to be a setting out of, or a clarity around what's the agenda.
All right. I like the collaboration part, because believe it or not, so sometimes we have conversations internally with the consultants, and they tend to be slightly scared of that. Do you know, because they feel like, at least I have conversations where the view is that as an agency or as a consulting business, I'm expected to bring a clear agenda and suggest a solution, and I have to come in and have this figured out. And then often we say, well, no, you could, co-create or collaborate with the client to find out what the solution is. And sometimes there's a resistance to that idea, but you just said that's what happens in the best cases, is this type of collaboration. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think you have to work together. I think that's a learning I took way back when I was working at Honda. I worked at a small agency in Germany, and the rationale between how we wanted to work was that was exactly it. We set out how we wanted to work together.
So would you say what you did there is a good example of how you build trust? Because as a consultant coming in to an organization, it's when it's trust, it's always got to be mutual, right? So we've got to earn trust with you, and you've got to earn trust with us to collaborate and work together. What would you just say is a good way to build that kind of trust?
Yeah, we're getting into kind of like how do you pitch?
Sort of, a little bit, but I would say this would probably be like the initial conversation, even before you sell the pitch, potentially. Yeah.
So maybe I think we all choose the easy path, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and when there's two options in front of us, right? If one path is too difficult because there's too many blockers, there's too many obstacles, it's treacly, it's poison snakes, whatever, we'll choose the easier path, right? And I think from an agency perspective, the conversation has to be had that goes, right, what are the paths in front of us? And what's the most difficult versus what's the most easy? Because I think from what I've seen, there's always a tendency to try and cherry pick where there are quick wins. And those tend to be the fairly easy, straightforward stuff. And by that, I mean, it's not that they're not detailed, they're probably highly detailed. And all of the issue count, the root cause analysis, all of that is done from a Lean Six Sigma perspective, looking at, right, how do I understand what is actually the problem? Whereas I think if a broader view is held from the outset, that breadth is maintained throughout that initial set of conversations without the agency narrowing the focus, the client or the customer themselves narrows it, then that allows for more trust, because actually their expertise is helping the customer to shape their journey and determine which path is going to deliver what over what period.
Yeah, that's These are interesting points, and Ash already pushed you in the direction of sort of giving pitch advice. But I think so. What was my secret interest after Ash introduced you was that I picture you are a recipient probably of a lot of consulting firm pitches, right? Or you probably the person in your role who sources a lot of support for the type of work you have to do around the transformation. Would that be correct?
Yeah.
And so if you're comfortable answering it, you describe these three buckets: so strategy, operations, and then also culture change, which that's maybe might be the hardest part. I don't know. Where do you usually seek outside help? And then if you, I don't know how to frame the question, but do you see some pitches or some things where you say, I like this, it's working well? Or do you see areas where you say, well, in this particular area, the consultancies are really missing the mark, and if I were on their end doing the marketing, here's what I would change?
It's really difficult. So I think the key aspect of it is to stay open. And I think we, as businesses in general, I think we have a tendency to fix scopes, right? So we try and work out what are we trying to solve for, right? Mm-hmm. And then we fix the scope based on that. And we want to keep it quite, I don't want to say inflexible, because it is flexible to a certain extent. But if we
comparable and manageable on your end and for sourcing and stuff, right?
Agreed. Yeah, and that's what I mean. There needs to be that flexibility around scope, because otherwise, I think there's the opportunity that the consultants can lead an organization down a rabbit hole, and they may not have the right capabilities or abilities internally to be able to progress it. Let's go back to the question. What is the actual question that you want to ask?
So I've been thinking about that. Maybe I can specify that. If you see these, if you receive pitches or you have these conversations, one of the points Ash and I go back and forth about occasionally in this podcast and outside of it is we often criticize ourselves or consultancy marketing sales, if you will, of not enough specificity. Like, if might be the case, we come to you, we present some materials to you and Kyocera in your case, and we talk about transformation, the role it has, and we have this and those offerings and this stuff as well. But to your earlier point, it's not actually specific to your organization and situation. It's more around the bend of, we've done this 20 times, and so we know what is great. So I guess my question could be, would you agree with that? Do consultants err on the side of not being specific enough in their communications, or do you disagree and say, no, usually what I see is pretty good, it's pretty targeted to you and your objectives?
So I think, and this is why it is a difficult question, because if you want to keep the breadth, then it's almost too non-specific. But if you go too narrow, it's too specific. So the customer knows. The customer always knows. Yeah. Okay, so I'm trying to understand, and this is where I guess a cold pitch is really difficult, because unless you have some understanding of what that organization is going through, you wouldn't be able to shape your offering to help support delivery of their goal. And I guess that's the biggest challenge for any kind of strategic, operational, transformational consultancy. Yeah. Is unless you're having an ongoing conversation with that company or with various heads of within that company, you're almost operating blindly.
Yeah.
Unless they're going out for tender.
Yeah. No, that's
I don't think I'll answer the question.
Yeah, that's fair.
Around it.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think sometimes what consultants forget, because they know they're competing with others at the same time for the operational, transformational work, is that they probably go either too specific to make a very specific pitch for something before they build out the relationship. And that might be one of the key areas that marketing can potentially help by providing the right kind of support to help them build that relationship. So the support that marketing offers in the professional services firm is much more, it's not about the specificity, but much more on the relationship building aspect.
Yeah, but that's the challenge, isn't it? Because that doesn't pay out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah.
you invest a lot of time, effort, and energy in relationship building, but actually that doesn't positively impact your bottom line. So from a consultancy perspective, I think there's going to be a blend, right? So there's got to be a blend of work coming in where you are always contributing to customers in terms of delivery, and that pays the bills. And then it's about understanding where are those opportunities to grow, and that's the relationship building.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I ask one follow up on that one? Such as would be my other tactical questions. Do you see anything in the digital transformation area, in the marketing the consultancies throw around, that really has you shake your head and say, "Come on, guys, just stop already"? I can give you mine. If I read stuff with AI powered something. I'm like, okay, everybody had enough of that sort of thing. Does the question make sense? Like, is there anything where you say, okay, that's a dead horse, and the industry could, the marketing of the industry could sort of get off of that? If I were,
no, to be honest, and I'll tell you why. Right? The answer is no. I think so. Let me give you an example. Take a coiled spring. Right, so with the loops that sit on top of each other, and then you can pull it out, and it stretches, and then you put it back together, and it comes a lot closer and a lot tighter. I think that, as with everything, we go through loops, but they're incremental loops. So I think that where the only thing that I think perhaps has lost a certain amount of momentum is around Taylorism, right? It's about transforming efficiency within an organization. I think that what I am seeing a lot more of, and this is driven by the pandemic, is that digital workplace. So it's understanding how do you create innovation and adaptability and collaboration from a digital perspective as opposed to a physical one. And I think that's an area of growth. I think there is a huge opportunity to truly understand from an employee perspective how they can embrace a digital workplace. And there's a lot of mention around sort of in-office, remote, hybrid, but it comes down to, and the conversation that we talk about from a Microsoft perspective or from a Google, etc., is very much around how are people working from a digital adoption perspective, and how are they embracing that and leveraging that moving forward. So my response is that if we can start to let go of Taylorism to a certain extent, if we can start to not just see lean, agile methodology, Six Sigma as the be all and end all, and have a look at, right, from an employee perspective, what are we doing to encourage driving their value within the business?
Nice. I'm not going to wrap up right just here, because that would be a perfect spot for it. But do you want to point people towards anything? Where can they find you online? And then maybe if they're interested in your unit within Kyocera, what's a place where they could go to?
Yeah, so look, I'm on LinkedIn, so you can look me up there, and there's a lot of detail around sort of my history, my current experience, and a lot of the posts and articles that I share or write, they tend to deep dive into sort of what's in my brain at the moment. But one of the areas, and I'll share it, one of the areas that I'm starting to form thoughts on is something I see across organizations at the moment, and that's very much around understanding the difference between complexity and complicatedness. Because I think there's an important transformational aspect in helping individuals and areas and functions to figure out for themselves where they're coming across complicated issues versus complex issues, and then how they go about tackling that and where they look for support. And it could be from an agency, consultancy perspective, but that's probably my next deeper dive area.
Very nice. And we'll point people to your profile, and then they can see once the article goes up and you have the complex versus complicated thing figured out. Very cool. Well, that was a lot of fun. So thanks, Sach, for joining us and sharing these ideas. And yeah, Ash, thanks for bringing Sach on. As always.
It was great, and thanks for joining us, Sach. Yeah.
And if you guys don't mind, I'll stop the recording right here. That was great.
Thanks for listening to Unbillable Hours. If you want more, tune in next week. You know where to find us.